Now, regardless of whether you are here to see what the big tech reveal is making this the fastest splitter in the world, you're gonna have to stick around and see how this parkour splitter test turns out.
Okay, you know what's one of life's simple pleasures for me? You use a protective face shield for like a year and you just can barely see through it, and no matter how much you try and clean it off, so you realize it's time to do something and you take off that protective plastic layer. So I'm excited because I can't wait to show you guys this. This is the true blue nerd stuff. This is what we've all been waiting for. This is the game changer. We get to kill a couple of birds with one stone. We get to make the splitter lighter yet, and we get to make it operate more efficiently. How are we going to do that? Well, I give you the humble golf ball. We are going to dimple the underside of this splitter. This is not an entirely new concept. Mythbusters did an episode where they dimpled an entire car. They covered a car with clay, then dimpled it with about 3-inch diameter dimples. I think it was a Taurus. And they didn't think that it would have any effect. Well, they improved fuel economy at 65 miles an hour by 3.5 miles per gallon, from 26 to 29.5 or something like that, which is impressive. Some people buy a different car for those kind of stats. Anyway, dimples have also been introduced into other things like airfoils, wind power generators. The blades, dimples at particular spots, decreased the drag coefficient and made the blades more efficient. So it absolutely does work. It is generally kind of difficult to do. It requires some depth to the material, so it's not practical. It's also not aesthetic. The reason why the dimpling works is because dimples are vortex generators on a local scale, on a small scale, that actually overall reduces drag. Now, as demonstrated by golf balls, dimples are more effective than a rough surface, and a rough surface is more effective than a completely smooth surface. Because there's so many places on a car that create larger vortices behind the car, past the windshield, going into the windshield, just past the front bumper, below a splitter, all those areas, and underneath the car at the wheels. There's all kinds of opportunities for there to be larger vortices that create drag. So the more we can reduce that, the better. Now, I know some of you right away would say, well, wait a second, what we want is a flat floor. Well, a dimpled surface is still a flat surface. We're going to go with larger dimples because it allows us to recreate the scale depth of a golf ball dimple, but allows us to go then deep enough to help us with the weight reduction. This whole idea gets better than that though. We're not just going to put ordinary golf ball dimples on the splitter. I was reading a master's thesis by Walter Robert Michaelchuk from the University of Tennessee, and it was entitled An Investigation of Different Golf Ball Dimple Flow Fields. So what he did was he tested various types of dimples. The traditional golf ball dish dimple, then he did a flat bottom dimple, and then he did a flat bottom with a slight mountain in the center dimple, and then the last one he increased the size and the diameter of that mountain inside the dimple. What he found was the last version of his dimple. It improved the dimple efficiency by 60% over the traditional golf ball dimple. Well, golf ball dimples are, the actual golf ball dimples are so small that it's just not practical to try and put little mountains inside those. But with our dimples we're going to do, it's going to be easy. So we're going to make super efficient dimples that are going to improve the flow of air under our splitter. Another question is, are dimples effective at the speeds that we're going to be driving at? Well, again, I'll refer to the Mythbusters episode where even at 65 miles per hour, it was effective. As we increase speed, golf balls travel at around 155 miles per hour for amateurs, around 180 miles per hour for pros, and optimally they may get up to 200 miles per hour. So this is good range for dimple effectiveness on the car. It's also been shown that as the speed increases, the drag coefficient does not. It basically stays constant, well beyond the range of golf ball speeds. So this is all good news for us and good range. So I threw together a quick template, plasma cut a hole in the center of this flat plate, and then I put a slice of perfectly round pipe in the center. That gives me my nice perfect round template. And I just tacked on some feet. That gives it a little bit of height and allows shavings to come up from underneath. And that should let us get going on those dimples.
I have mapped out my large dimple locations. We are also going to fill these sections in between them with smaller dimples.
To create the dimples, I've gone the way of using routers and templates. To best explain the dimensions of the spherical dimple that we want to use, studies by a person with the last name Ting showed that the spherical dimples on a golf ball are optimal in terms of the width versus the depth. So we basically want to utilize that same ratio and just blow it up to the size we want, 3 inches, 2 inches, 3.5 inches, and recreate that same ratio. Now, when we increase the size of the spherical dimple to about 3 1/4 or 3.5 inches, the depth that we were looking for is about 1/4 inch. In fact, it's just under 1/4 inch. I think it's about 0.22 of an inch. So it's through the first 2 layers of our 9mm sandwich layer. So if you think of our splitter in terms of the sandwich layers of aluminum, so you've got a top aluminum layer and then a composite layer and then a double aluminum second layer and then another composite and then another double aluminum layer, composite, and then our final single aluminum layer on the bottom. So what we want to do is we want to go through the first aluminum layer, the first composite layer, through the next 2 aluminum layers and well into our middle composite layer and stop before we get to our second double aluminum layer. That would still give us lots of rigidity, lots of strength in that section of panel, even although we are dimpling it. Now it varies depending on what you can find locally for router bits and or have access to. For a dimple that's about 3 1/4 inches to 3.5 inches, we want to get a router bit with as large of a radius as possible. This is 1.5 inch diameter, so it's got a 3/4 inch radius. That's about as big as I can find anywhere. The problem is finding that radius on the right type of router bit is a challenge. This particular router bit is known as a bottom bearing router bit. In other words, it used to have this little bearing that sits right here on the bottom, screwed in through a nice little sort of a raised nose on this bit. I lopped all of that off. I ground all of that away because I want to turn this into a top bearing bit. And that's, in other words, the bearing is going to sit back here. That allows us to run along a template. Now we're not going to go obviously that deep. We're going to use the bottom 1/4 inch of height on the bit. That actually utilizes the majority of the radius. Probably 5/8 of an inch of the radius gets utilized, and just we forego that last bit because we just don't want to go, we'll end up going right through our sandwich layer. Now finding a round nose top bearing router bit with a large diameter or a large radius is really tough. The largest I could find was about 1/2 inch ordering online. Freud, I think, had one that was a 1/2 inch radius. So again, by the time that we only use up about 1/4 inch of the depth, it'll end up being something like a 3/8 of an inch of radius, and that's not very much. What that means is that that dimple, instead of being a nice gradual spherical dimple, will be more of a drop edge and then a flat bottom. And so I was trying to give it as much of a gradual dish shape going into the flat bottom that we want. That's why a larger radius is important. So I just went and designed my own, and this is what I came up with for this. A large bearing. I think it's from an old snowblower actually. And I had to kind of combine several things to make this work because the shaft diameter on this bearing was huge. So I actually ended up fitting, you can probably see them there, 2 bearings stacked inside with 2 bushings stacked inside that, and then trapped between a couple of really thin washers, and that gave me my bearing that slid exactly over the 1/4 inch shaft to make that work. So it was jumping through a few hoops, but it did the job, it got it done, it worked. I'm quite happy about that. For the smaller dimple, I have used basically just a 45, also top bearing design bit, and it's not ideal. For the outside edge, it's probably a bit steeper than we want for optimal, but it will still have a really good effect and probably advantageous effect over just a regular dimple. I apologize, I know this stuff is like verbal melatonin. So enough about dimples. That is probably already much more information about dimples than you were hoping for.
So the first thing we want to do is standardize the depth for this router. I'm going to start a bit cautiously, and then I can always dial in a bit more depth to get it down to where we want it. Okay, we got it. So this template, the way that I have designed the feet, each foot gets screwed into where a dimple is going to get cut out. That way there's no extra holes going through this splitter at all. Basically, we're just routering over the screw holes as we come to them, and no one will even see them. For the outside rows of dimples, 1 foot of the template is always outside the splitter so that the whole splitter won't move as I'm routering these dimples. So as I'm going along here, I start to realize, boy, this is making one heck of a mess, and it's going all over the ground. The wind is picking up, and it's just, I got to do something about this. I'm going to have to vacuum this as I go. It's just going to be a disaster. The method is down pat now, making some serious momentum. This is going well.
So just in case you guys couldn't tell, I'm actually spending most of my time vacuuming. Anyway, that's what the cut shop will be for. Back there, about 16 feet wide. Take care of all this mess. Until then, just gonna have to make do the way I am.
Now, I know what y'all are thinking. He just made a splitter that looks like it got attacked by a giant squid, and he's celebrating. What I am happy about is that my ad hoc homemade router bit didn't come flying apart at ludicrous speed and take out something important at waist height.
So I utilized our previous template base, made a new template that can get inserted in the center. That'll give us our smaller dimple template.
I think I've shown you enough routering. So here it is, all the routering done, all the dimples done.
Time to take the plastic off.
Now, this brings us to one of our make it or break it moments of reckoning, the weigh-in. Did we make our 15-pound goal? Of course we made the goal. And yes, all of the aluminum hardware and the support rods in total weigh, you guessed it, 1/2 pound. Let's throw this baby back in and finish the install. quick word from our sponsor, Baby Cakes.
Okay.
Martin,
Yeah?
it's 10:30.
Oh, okay.
Next freaking time. Hurry up.
All right.
These two mid-mount points still need to be drilled and tapped. This is basically where I show you how quickly I can tap using a drill. Okay, let's leave it off there. The second mid-mount point, of course, was done exactly the same way. Next, the splitter was drilled and then screwed into the bottom of the air dam in about half a dozen spots just to suck it up tight and apply a good marine sealant to where the two mate.
So this is my solution for mounting the support rods to the bottom of the bumper. I'm using the existing trim bracket that runs under the bumper to hold the trim in place. Oh, hi. This trim bracket has got 9 support points basically with M6 bolts, so it's actually fairly strong. What I've done is welded a plate that basically spans between these two bolt points, and that distributes any force between them. Then I drilled and tapped my support rod hole there. The center one, I added this little bracket here, and because it's so close to this fastening point, I'm not too worried. And then the other side is the same, basically bridging the distance between these two support bolts and then drilling and tapping there. That will be plenty of strength. Overall, the splitter is not depending on one or two aspects for its strength, but rather it's a combination of many different contributors that allow it to be light and as strong as it is. So the support rods arrived. I don't know what time it is. I was kind of excited to get them in, so I'm gonna get going. I used 3 fender washers, and I've welded the nuts from the rods on the back side. I'm going to countersink about 1/8 of an inch in the bottom of the splitter so that the fender washer and nut can sit virtually flush underneath. They're really quite thin, but they're strong. These are really lightweight. They're not super strong, but they don't need to be. It's just M5 hardware, so it really can only be that strong anyway. So, but when working all in conjunction, it'll be plenty. Countersink. I've already drilled my hole in the center of my splitter. As you guys can see, I still haven't removed all the crap that's in behind the car, but hey.
Okay, so the support rods are in. This brings us to the next reckoning. Will this splitter hold up? We got to do some testing. Here's one good way to do that. this splitter passes the test. And I promise, that is the most dancing I'm ever going to do in a video. Stay tuned, there are more aero developments coming up for the back of the car, plus some 5S GTE headwork for this summer. And I've also included some nerd notes for those that just can't get enough of all the stupid technical stuff I could come up with.